You planted tomatoes this year. Again. You watered them religiously, staked them carefully, and watched hornworms devour half your crop in 3 days. You got maybe 20 pounds of fruit after 3 months of backbreaking work. Meanwhile, there's a plant that laughs at your tomato struggle. It produces food every single day for decades. And you plant it exactly once. So what is this magical plant that makes tomatoes look like the high-maintenance drama queens they are? Keep watching and find out. The plant we're talking about is something most gardeners walk right past at the nursery. It doesn't have the Instagram appeal of heirloom tomatoes. Food bloggers aren't writing sonnets about it. But here's what it does have. It produces edible food within weeks of planting, not months. It keeps producing through summer, fall, winter, and spring. Frost? Doesn't care. Heat wave? Still going. And once you plant it, you're basically set for the next 5 to 10 years. No replanting. No starting seeds indoors under grow lights like some kind of botanical mad scientist. We're talking about perennial onions. Specifically, the varieties that'll change how you think about growing food. And no, we're not talking about regular bulb onions that you plant from sets every spring. Those are the tomatoes of the onion world. High maintenance, single harvest, then they're done. We're talking about the cheat codes of the garden. Walking onions, Egyptian onions, potato onions, Welsh onions. These things are to regular onions what Alaska is to Rhode Island, in terms of pure strategic value. Let's start with why tomatoes became the poster child of home gardening in the first place. Because honestly, it's kind of a scam, not a conspiracy theory scam, but a historical accident that convinced millions of people that gardening means spending April through October in servitude to a plant that'll probably get blight anyway. Tomatoes won the publicity battle. They're photogenic. They smell amazing. That first bite of a sun-warmed tomato fresh off the vine is legitimately one of life's great pleasures. But here's what the gardening magazines don't tell you in their glossy spreads. Tomatoes are native to South America. They evolved in places where growing seasons stretch 8 to 10 months, and frost is a myth your grandparents told to scare you. They need consistent temperatures between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. They need full sun, at least 6 hours. They need regular watering, but not too much or the fruits split. They need support structures. They need pruning if you want decent-sized fruit. They need protection from about 17 different diseases and 9,000 insect species that consider them a delicacy. And after all that effort, you get one harvest. One. Then you rip out the plants, throw them in the compost, and start the whole circus again next year. If you planted in May, you're harvesting in August and September, then nothing. For 9 months of the year, your tomato patch is just dirt with a memory. But perennial onions? These are the plants that looked at the entire concept of growing season and said, nah, we're good. Let's talk about what makes them so absurdly productive. First, the growing cycle. You plant walking onions in spring or fall. Doesn't really matter which. Within 3 to 4 weeks, you can start harvesting green onions. Not baby plants you're sacrificing for an early taste. Fully flavored green onions. The kind you'd pay $4 a bunch for at the farmer's market. You cut them at soil level, and here's the magic part. They grow back, in a week. You can harvest the same plant every week throughout the entire growing season. That's roughly 40 harvests per year from a single planting. Let's do the math that tomato seed packets don't want you to do. A tomato plant, if you're lucky, and the garden gods smile upon you, might give you 10 to 15 pounds of fruit over 6 to 8 weeks. We'll be generous and call it 20 pounds. That's from one plant taking up 4 square feet of space for 5 months. A perennial onion in the same space harvested weekly gives you about 2 ounces of green onions per week. That's 52 harvests at 2 ounces each. That's 6.5 pounds per year. But here's the kicker. That's every year. For 10 years. Without replanting. So over the life of the plant, you're looking at 65 pounds of food from the same space that gave you 20 pounds of tomatoes once. Oh, and tomatoes need to be used within days of harvest or processed immediately. Frozen, canned, turned into sauce. More work, perennial onion varieties, like potato onions. They store for 6 months at room temperature. You harvest them in summer, stick them in a basket in your pantry, and you're pulling fresh onions out of that basket at Christmas. No canning, no freezing, no special equipment, just a basket and a cool, dry spot. But the real advantage isn't just the production numbers. It's the strategic value of having food growing every single day of the year. Let's say it's February. Your tomato beds are frozen solid under 6 inches of snow. You can't grow anything right now, right? Wrong. Because walking onions are sitting under that snow, completely unbothered, and the second you get a 40-degree day, you can brush off the snow and harvest green onions. I'm not exaggerating. These plants are cold hardy to at least minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Some varieties laugh at minus 40. They're the plant equivalent of that friend who goes running in a t-shirt when it's 30 degrees out. They don't just survive winter, they ignore it. And in summer, when your lettuce has bolted, your spinach has turned bitter, and your tomatoes are still green because it's only June, the perennial onions are producing. They don't care that it's 95 degrees. They don't bolt. They don't go bitter. They just keep making food. This is what gardeners call a 4-season crop. But even that term undersells it. Because it's not just that you can harvest in 4 seasons. It's that you can harvest on any day of any season that isn't actively being torn apart by a hurricane. January 15th. Harvest Day, July 22nd. Harvest Day, July 22nd. Harvest Day, July 22nd. October 3rd? Now let's talk about the varieties. Because this is where it gets really interesting. Not all perennial onions are created equal. And knowing which one fits your situation is the difference between good and absolutely game-changing. Walking onions, also called Egyptian onions or tree onions, are probably the weirdest-looking plant in your garden. They grow like regular green onions, but then they do something that seems like a glitch in the plant code. Instead of flowering, they grow tiny bulbs at the top of their stalks. These bulbs get heavy. The stalk bends over and the bulbs touch the ground and root. The plant literally walks across your garden over the years. It's like someone crossed an onion with a slow-motion slinky. These top bulbs are fully edible. You can pickle them whole. They're intense, concentrated onion flavor bombs, about the size of a grape, and any bulb that touches ground becomes a new plant. Which means you plant walking onions once, and they slowly colonize whatever space you give them. Some people consider this a feature. Some people consider it an invasion. Either way, it's free plants forever. Potato onions are the storage champions. They're called potato onions because they multiply underground like potatoes. You plant one bulb, and by harvest time it's divided into 5 to 8 new bulbs. Each bulb stores for 6 to 8 months in ambient conditions. No refrigeration needed. Just dry them after harvest and stick them somewhere cool and dark. A basement works. A closet works. I know people who store them in cardboard boxes under their bed. These are the onions you plant. If you want to stop buying onions from the grocery store entirely, 1 square yard of potato onions can easily produce 40 to 50 pounds per year once established. That's roughly 200 onions. And because they multiply, you can eat half your harvest and replant half. And you'll have more plants next year than you started with. Welsh onions, despite the name, aren't from Wales. They're from Asia. The name is probably a corruption of foreign onions. These are the closest to what you'd buy at an Asian grocery as scallions. Long white shanks, mild flavor, perfect for stir-fries and soups. They clump and divide like ornamental grasses, so one plant becomes 5, becomes 25 over a few years. You can dig up the clumps, divide them, and suddenly you have enough Welsh onion plants to line your entire garden border. Which, by the way, is a legitimate landscape strategy. These plants look good enough that you can use them as ornamental edging and nobody knows you're secretly farming your front yard. And here's something nobody tells you about onions in general. They're one of the most disease-resistant crops you can grow. Tomatoes get early blight, late blight, fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, and about 12 other fungal diseases with scary Latin names. Onions. They basically don't get sick. The worst thing that happens is they might get a little rust in extremely humid conditions. And even that barely affects the harvest. No spraying, no organic fungicides. No desperate midnight Googling of brown spots on tomato leaves, what do I do? The pest situation is equally lopsided. Tomatoes attract hornworms, aphids, whiteflies, spider mites, and cutworms. Your average perennial onion attracts mostly nothing. The sulfur compounds that give onions their flavor are natural pest deterrents. The few things that will eat onions are specialist insects that most gardens never see. I've grown perennial onions for 8 years, And I've never once had to deal with a pest problem. Not one time. Meanwhile, my tomatoes require weekly scouting missions and the occasional therapeutic screening session when I find hornworm damage. Let's talk about the setup process, because this is where perennial onions really flex. Tomatoes require soil preparation. You need compost. You need balanced fertilizer. You need to check your pH. You need to worry about calcium for blossom end rot. You're basically building a custom soil blend like you're growing competition orchids. Perennial onions grow in whatever you've got. Clay soil? Fine. Sandy soil? Also fine. Slightly acidic? Slightly alkaline? They genuinely do not care. The only thing they actually need is drainage. If water pools in your planting area for days after rain, you'll want to add some compost or plant in a raised bed. But that's it. That's the whole requirement list. Drainage. You don't need to start them from seed under lights in February. You buy starts or bulbs, you stick them in the ground, you water them once, and you're basically done, where you're hardening off seedlings and timing your transplanting to after the last frost date like you're planning a military operation. The most complicated part of planting walking onions is deciding where you want them, because they're going to be there for a decade. Choose wisely. But also don't stress too much, because you can always dig them up and move them. They're surprisingly chill about being relocated. The maintenance schedule for perennial onions is hilariously minimal. After that, they're on their own, unless you're in a serious drought. You can fertilize them if you want bigger harvests, but they'll produce fine without it. They're getting nutrients from deeper in the soil than annual crops can reach because their roots are perennial. Every year, those roots go deeper and spread wider. By year 3, these plants are tapped into soil resources your tomatoes can only dream about. You don't stake them, you don't prune them, you don't pinch off suckers or worry about determinate versus indeterminate growth habits. The entire management strategy is harvest when you want onions, don't harvest when you don't. That's it. That's the whole system. And the harvest itself is satisfying in a way tomato harvesting never quite achieves. With tomatoes, you're constantly checking for ripeness, hoping you pick them before they split or the bugs get them. You're in a race against time and nature. With perennial onions, you walk outside, you cut what you need, you walk back inside. 30 seconds. You want green onions for tacos tonight? Go cut some. You want onion bulbs for roasting? Dig a few. The plant doesn't care. It'll make more. This is food production, as casual as picking a weed. Except the weed is delicious and costs you nothing. The storage situation deserves its own section, because this is where perennial onions completely dunk on tomatoes. A ripe tomato has maybe a week before it starts getting soft and questionable. You can stretch that to 2 weeks in the fridge, but the texture goes downhill fast. Cherry tomatoes last a bit longer, but we're still talking days to weeks, not months. This means when your tomatoes ripen, you're suddenly in processing mode. Canning sauce. Making salsa. Dehydrating slices. It's a part-time job that happens in August when it's already hot and you really don't want to be running a canner for 6 hours. Potato onions laugh at this entire concept. You harvest them in midsummer. You spread them out in a shaded, airy spot for a week to cure. And then you put them in a basket. A literal basket. Like you're in a medieval painting. And 6 months later, they're still perfect. I'm pulling onions. I harvested in July to cook with in January. And they're as firm and flavorful as the day I dug them up. No electricity, no special equipment, no vacuum sealers or mason jars. A basket, in a closet. The other perennial varieties work slightly differently for storage. Walking onion top bulbs can be pickled and stored for a year easily. The green portions of all varieties can be chopped and frozen. And they actually freeze better than tomatoes because there's no texture change. Or you can dehydrate them into onion powder, which keeps literally forever and is absurdly useful in cooking. This storage factor changes the whole equation of food security. Tomatoes give you abundance for 6 weeks and then nothing. Perennial onions give you steady production for 10 months of the year, plus stored bulbs for the other 2 months. There's never a time when you don't have onions. Never. That's a level of food independence that's actually meaningful. You're not just gardening for fun or for that one amazing caprese salad. You're actually replacing something you'd otherwise buy every single week at the store. Let's talk money. Because the economic case for perennial onions is overwhelming. A tomato plant costs anywhere from $3 to $8, depending on whether you buy it from a big box store or a boutique nursery. You plant it. It produces once, then it's done. Let's say you get $20 worth of tomatoes from a $5 plant. That's a 4-to-1 return. Not bad. But a perennial onion costs the same up front, maybe $5 to $7 for a good-sized start. But it produces for 10 years. At a conservative estimate of $5 worth of onions per year, that's $50 of production from a $5 investment. A 10-to-1 return. And that's conservative. If you're actually using them regularly, you're easily getting $10 to $15 worth of green onions per plant per year. Green onions at the grocery store cost about $3 to $4 a bunch. That's roughly 4 ounces of usable onion. If you harvest 2 ounces per week from each plant, and you have 10 plants, that's 20 ounces weekly. That's 5 bunches, or $15 to $20 per week. Over a year, that's $780 to $1,000 worth of green onions. From 10 plants that cost you $50 total and take up maybe 15 square feet of space. The return on investment is so lopsided it almost doesn't make sense. But that's what happens when you grow perennial crops instead of annuals. The math just works completely differently. You're amortizing your initial investment over years instead of months. And every year after the first is almost pure profit in terms of equivalent grocery store value. Now some of you are thinking, okay, this sounds great, but I don't have a huge yard. I live in an apartment with a balcony. Can I actually grow these in containers? And the answer is absolutely yes. Perennial onions are actually fantastic container plants. They don't need deep pots like tomatoes, which want at least 5-gallon containers. You can grow productive perennial onions in pots as small as 1 gallon, though 2 or 3 gallons is better for long-term health. A standard 10-inch pot can hold 3 to 5 plants depending on variety. And because they're perennial, you pot them up once and you're done. No annual repotting, no soil replacement, just water and occasional fertilizer. And they'll produce from that container for years. This makes them perfect for urban gardeners, apartment dwellers, or anyone with limited space. You could have 6 pots of perennial onions on a balcony and never buy green onions again. Ever. That same balcony space might hold 2 tomato plants that produce for 2 months. The space efficiency is incomparable. The climate range is another massive advantage. Tomatoes are tropical plants masquerading as temperate crops. They really only thrive in zones 5 through 9, and even then, they need consistent warm weather. Perennial onions grow successfully in zones 3 through 10. That's basically the entire United States, except for the most extreme parts of Alaska and the hottest parts of southern Florida. If you can grow grass, you can probably grow perennial onions. They handle cold better than almost any other edible plant. They handle heat better than most cool season crops. They're the Goldilocks crop that works almost everywhere. There's also something to be said for the learning curve. Tomato growing has entire books written about it. Online forums argue about pruning strategies and fertilizer ratios. There's a whole culture of tomato expertise that can be intimidating for new gardeners. Perennial onions have almost no learning curve. You plant them. You cut them when you want onions. That's the entire skill set. A 5-year-old could successfully grow perennial onions. This makes them perfect first crops for people who want to start growing food but feel overwhelmed by the complexity of vegetable gardening. And because they're perennial, they're forgiving of mistakes. Forgot to water? They'll recover. Planted them at the wrong time? They'll still establish, just maybe slower. Harvested too much at once? They'll bounce back. Tomatoes punish errors. One missed watering at the wrong time and you've got blossom end rot on half your crop. One unexpected cold snap and your seedlings are dead. Perennial onions are remarkably tolerant of gardener incompetence, which frankly is what most of us need. The final advantage that nobody talks about is the mental load. Tomato season is stressful. You're constantly monitoring, checking for pests, adjusting stakes, removing diseased leaves, hoping this is finally the year you don't get blight. It's a low-grade anxiety that runs from May through September. Perennial onions require essentially zero mental energy. They're just there, growing, producing, not demanding anything from you. In a world where we're all drowning in tasks and obligations, having a food source that asks nothing of you is genuinely valuable. It's one less thing to worry about. One less thing to check on. One less thing that might fail and disappoint you. So why aren't perennial onions the standard recommendation for home gardeners? It's mostly cultural inertia and aesthetics. Tomatoes photograph well. They're visually exciting. A ripe red tomato is inherently beautiful. In a way, a green onion just isn't. Garden media needs pretty pictures, and perennial onions don't deliver that same visual punch. But if we're being honest about what actually makes sense for food production, for return on investment, for reliability and ease of growing, perennial onions win by every objective measure. They produce more food over time. They require less work. They survive conditions that would kill tomatoes. They store better. They cost less long-term. They take up less space for equivalent production. They work in more climates. They're easier for beginners. The only thing tomatoes do better is taste like tomatoes, which admittedly is a pretty good trick. But as a foundation crop, as something you're actually going to depend on for consistent food production, perennial onions are in a completely different league. If you're just starting to grow food, plant perennial onions first. Before the tomatoes, before the peppers, before any of the glamorous crops, get your onions established. And suddenly you have a reliable food source that'll keep producing while you experiment with everything else. And when your tomatoes get blight in July and you're standing there feeling defeated, you can walk over to your perennial onions, harvest a handful, and remember that some plants actually want to help you succeed. That's the script. Now go plant some onions and reclaim your summer from tomato tyranny.